Good afternoon. My name is Solène Collin, and on behalf of LuxFlag, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the next session of the LuxFlag Sustainable Investment Week. I'm pleased to introduce our next session titled ESG Disclosure from the Bank's Perspective, hosted by ABBL. We will welcome now Julien Fromous from ABBL, who is Sustainable Finance Advisor. Julien, we will host the session and introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Solène. So I will just start with a, I would say, brief presentation to introduce or set the scene, and then, of course, I will be joined by three great panelists. I would start with Alessandra Simonelli, Head of Sustainability at Banque Internationale, Luxembourg. We're going to have also joining online Mehtap Numanoglu, Chief Risk Officer at BBH, and we're going to have also as well Francesco Pirovano, in charge of strategic initiative at Intesa San Paolo. Maybe briefly, and I will just share some slides to set the scene for those who have already attended the sessions in the morning and then the presentation from Hortense before. I will try not to repeat too much what has been already said, but at least from the various discussions and exchanges that we have with our members at the association, of course, we can clearly say that the banks now, there is no doubt that they see the merit of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan. All those regulations which tries to frame the way banks will have to incorporate those ESG factors within the way they operate. And this is like a great momentum to work with our members, banks members, to see how we could improve the way banks will support this transition. I don't know if I can have maybe the first slide, but the three pillars around which we are working together with our members are basically, I can control myself, sorry. Are basically the way or the increased transparency that is required by banks according to certain standards and based on common definitions. So this is the three pillars that we call here harmonization, standardization, and transparency. So basically, this harmonization part come from the common definition, the development of common definitions and understanding about which economic activities could be deemed sustainable, of course. And as we talked previously in the other sessions, that will be, of course, one of the key challenges faced by the banks. And then we have this standardization part, meaning that the new obligation of transparency that were placed now on the financial institutions to report both the one EU located, I would say, and the one that are operating in the EU to report sustainability-related information from their own operations, but also their own contribution to the sustainability agenda, broadly speaking, will be framed and will be done according to certain European sustainability reporting standards in the future. So we're going to have also common sustainable finance practices that are happening in the market. So those three elements form the kind of ecosystem of the regulatory framework that is creating by the European Commission to support this broad transition. And I put here certain, I would say, the most relevant obligations for the banking sectors in terms of ESG disclosures. And that would start with the so-called taxonomy. So when we talk about taxonomy and the taxonomy regulation, of course, we are talking about the economic activities and the related criteria to define what could be deemed sustainable. But there is also an article, the so-called Article 8 taxonomy regulation, which places also obligations for non-financial and financial undertakings to report on their alignment with this taxonomy. So this is a first disclosure requirement for banks. And I think we're going to discuss it a bit further within our panel. Then you have the non-financial reporting directive, already existing, already in place, which would be amended or revised by the so-called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. But that would mean, again, that we are trying to set a kind of level playing field with financial information and non-financial information. So we're going to move from what we call the non-financial disclosures to sustainability-related disclosures. So much more will be required by banks on many different topics according to environmental factors, social factors, governance factors as well. And starting 2024 with an extended scope in the years to come. We have also disclosures from a risk perspective now for large undertakings, but we're going to see in the next slide that smaller actors will be also affected, meaning that now banks will have also to disclose the way they are incorporating ESG factors within their own risk management framework, but also disclose the actions they have implemented to mitigate those risks. And finally, we have SFDR. No need to talk too much about it, but I would place transparency obligations. So we had a lot of discussion about if we could invest in green, non-green. I guess we also need to keep in mind that for the time being, there's no regulation that would prevent banks to invest in an economic activity or another. It's more being transparent about what you are doing. And if you are going green, you have to be transparent about how you are implementing actions to be really green. And this is what SFDR is requiring, full transparency about how you are considering ESG elements within your own investment process and how you are incorporating those ESG elements as well when you are creating ESG-related products. And then you have 3 related other regulations, not directly impacting the ESG disclosures aspect of banks, but closely related, and we will see it in the next slide. So we have the obligation to collect the sustainability preferences of the bank's clients to make sure that we can recommend or advise products that are compatible with the sustainability preferences, and then we will also have to disclose information about the product itself. You have the corporate sustainable due diligence proposals, still a proposal, a new directive. Again, for the not targeting financial institutions themselves, but they fall in the scope as well. And again, financial institutions will have to identify certain risks, current, actual, and potential risks with regards to human rights, environmental matters as well, and also disclose what they are doing in terms of processes and policies to manage those risks. And finally, we have a national circular issued by the CSSF in June last year, and again about ESG risk, and which would include as well a disclosure section for less significant institutions, meaning smaller actors located in Luxembourg that are not like under the supervision of the ECB, but under the supervision of the CSSF, that will have to disclose information about ESG risk. So maybe just to explain a bit further how those regulations interact together. So this is the ecosystem. Sometimes it's very difficult, especially for those who are not like in the ESG space for a long time. But we try here just to explain how banks play a pivotal role and how they are impacting from different angles as part of this regulation. So they have to collect information as part of the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, the future CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Those information will flow to the bank, and they will use those information to either produce products that would be like recommended to their own clients as part of the asset manager role of the bank, or they will also use those information to explain how they are considering ESG factors within their own investment process or advisory process. And those information will be used, of course, to match products that would be recommended to the product, to the clients according to their own sustainability preferences. And all that information, again, will be used to report on taxonomy alignment of banks, meaning how green is the bank in terms of lending activities, investment activities, and how they are considering risk. And those information will be used as well for risk management perspective, making sure that the bank or the banks have all the information needed to make sure that they are not too much exposed to risky activity according to environmental factors, human rights, adverse impacts, and what they are doing as well to mitigate those risks. That will be also important from an investor's perspective, making sure that the bank, from a risk-based approach, is also doing the right thing to be resilient on a longer term. A bit packed, but the idea here would be to make sure that we can also capture the fact that in a first stage of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan, to be fully transparent, there was a lot of complaints, of course, very complex framework, very new, a lot of difficulties to understand the new concepts and new definitions. We were a bit lost to set the tone at the top level, meaning that the boards and the executive management was a bit lost with all those new regulations. And it was very difficult to set a clear strategic focus. There were a lot of complaints. And now I must confess that we are clearly moving from a complaint phase, I would say, to a comply phase. Now we are working quite hard with our members. A lot of banks are doing a lot of huge efforts to make sure that they will comply with all those regulations, depending on the nature of their activities, the profile of the bank. Of course, this is something we're going to see as well in the presentation. So I just put here some challenges that the banks are facing. Hopefully we're going to address some of them within the discussion that we're going to have with the panelists. Feel free to use also the inspiration to build your own questions, of course. Happy to answer any of them. So we're going to have challenge at a strategic level, how to seize those regulations as a business opportunities as well. From a governance and HR perspective, a lot of new things to learn. So we need to train relevant staff. We need also to make sure that we have the right people at the right place. And then operations and IT, of course, data challenges is probably the biggest one, but we have much more to say about it. And then this more the compliance issues here. A lot of regulations. I saw the jigsaw just before, a lot of like pieces that we have to work with. And you have those also two other elements, the implementation part, meaning that you have to comply with different standards that could be like different at EU level. We saw in the Arthur's presentation that we might have also some national regulatory arbitrage as well, but we have also to converge with the international standards that are being developed in the US or other countries and regions of the world. So this is also something which impact Luxembourg, especially as you have a lot of subsidiaries here. We have a lot of different businesses. We have private banks, we have depository banks activities, large banks that are either like parent companies or subsidiaries with exposures all over the world or assets managed all over the world. So this is like tricky challenges, and hopefully we can try to use that kind of inspiration for further discussion with our panelists. So I will stop here, not to take too much time, that's good, in 15 minutes, that's fine. And I will join my panelists to answer or ask some questions and maybe get a useful, insightful presentation as well. Thanks. I hope it works. Good? Yeah, very good. No. So I think I'm going to start with maybe Francesco. Maybe very generic question. Basically, you are exposed to many ESG disclosures related requirements. So what are the most relevant requirements from the banking perspective, but from your own organization's perspective as well? And how do you basically address them? And I guess we have also a presentation that would support your answer. I guess, or you have your own mic now? Yeah, that's fine, thanks.
Sure. Is it working? Yes. Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. I would say that disclosure for banks on ESG now is like the tip of the iceberg. I mean, until a few years ago, ESG was a matter of disclosure, so you had a CSR team that would handle that, especially with investors. But because of the massive wave of new regulation and initiatives also from the private side that has come to banks, I would say now that sustainability is a matter of strategy for a bank. In fact, I'm not a risk manager, I'm not a CSR person. I come from a team, I'm part of a team that reports to the CEO and a team that handles like special projects or special initiatives for the banks. So significant initiatives. And a few years ago, we decided that the CEO decided that sustainability and ESG should be treated as a strategic matter for the bank. In fact, in the business plan we published this year, one of the pillars of the business plan is sustainability. Therefore, coming back to your question, we are talking about a lot of different requirements in terms of disclosures, coming from the taxonomy, alignment, for instance, from EBA on Pillar 3, going also to the investment side, as we saw before. And that requires a different approach to how to handle this. I don't see the slide, but it's fine. I can go quickly through them. I would just want to... Okay, I just skip to one slide, I guess. That would be the most relevant. Just to give you like an example of what does that mean for us. So this one is applying the EU taxonomy to bank lending. So this is like very relevant for us because, of course, as you know, like we are required to start reporting on eligibility and then later on taxonomy alignment. And if you can see, we have handling this important issue through a project setup. And that requires at least working on at least on 3 dimensions. So if I'm approaching lending, I have to go through an analysis of the sectors of my clients, the single counterparties, and then the products, the transaction that I'm offering to my clients. And then you have to go through a process that implies different steps, like assessment of your current stocks of loans, and that's, I think, the most tricky part is define your level of ambition, dialogue with the business steering, and then, of course, implement this into your processes in the credit strategies and the pricing. All these steps involve an integrated approach with basically all the functions from the bank, from the top management to the risk, from the compliance to the marketing, and also to the business. And as you can see, then you have, coming back to your question, all these that we call enabling factors, which are the key challenge that we have to deal with in order to achieve this stream of process. The first one is governance and process. So we have massive regulation that is coming up. Who is going to be in charge of, first of all, studying all this regulation, and then who is going to be governing this regulation that is coming? It's going to be risk, it's going to be the CFO area. That's a question we have to answer. What are the processes that are impacted? Do we need of course, we need to perform a gap analysis on the existing processes, but are there new processes that are not yet in the bank that must be set up and put in place? Data and IT is also another challenge because coming back to the taxonomy, we get a bunch of new data which banks do not own. Banks need to either buy it from providers or collect from clients. That's another. And then once you have this data, you have to integrate them into your core system. These ESG data are not like a separate data, but must be included into your client or into your sector assessment. Competences and training, that's key, because I was discussing also during lunch, we have in the bank a few functions, a few departments. They are super familiar with taxonomy, with this new concept. Others, which are not. So you need to at least ensure that everyone in the bank have at least a basic training on what ESG means, what is the taxonomy is, and what are the implications. Not only because of internal awareness, but especially, and then here I come to the next point, because at the end of the day, you need to engage clients on these topics. And of course, within the client's universe, you can have like large clients, which are also familiar with these new topics. They're already reporting under the NFRD, for instance, on sustainabilities, but then with the entry into force in 2024 of the CSRD, then the perimeter of these counterparties will increase, and then, especially in the case of Italy, where you have a large sector of SMEs, then you have to start to engage with undertakings like companies which are getting ready now, but they're not familiar with all these concepts, especially in getting data to the bank. And the last one is reporting and disclosure. The reporting and disclosure probably is going to change also the way that has been carried out from the past. ESG now is part of the strategy of the bank, so, and there are a lot of initiatives, a lot of regulations, so you have to be able to communicate in a very efficient way and also in a very comprehensive way. So you have to be able to connect the dots. So you don't have to look, for instance, at the green asset ratio itself or other indicator in a standalone way, but you have to be able to connect in the dots and communicate to the market. And also in doing that, you need to be, especially now that we are moving like our first steps. I mean, as we saw also in the previous presentation, not everyone has the answer right now. You need to ensure like full transparency and to provide all the caveats, especially to investor and to regulator, because that's probably the way to be credible also on this topic. So these are, in a nutshell, what my answer would be to your question. Of course, each of these topic would need like an extensive, could need a certain explanation, or we could go into details, but I just wanted to give you like a broad picture of what that means for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the level of ambition would be probably something interesting to hear, how you're like setting that level of ambition. You have to have like forward-looking information to set the targets. And I would probably a question also for both of you to support setting those initiatives and make sure that you are reporting the right information. How you are organized? How did you maybe convince your own management to set the right governance around ESG disclosures? How you organize this massive project? Probably the same question for Alessandra, how you organize internally. Or we can start with you.
Yeah, actually, as you say, there are a lot of projects which we are concerned as a universal bank. So globally, all the regulations you mentioned before, there are a lot of people working on it within the bank. So first of all, we launched for each of the regulation dedicated projects because they were not launched at the same time, the regulations coming up progressively. And at some point you realize that you can't handle them individually and that there's really a need to have a global program for that, and that most of the regulations are interconnected, so that people working on SFDR have to talk to the risk people working on the EBA requirements for the prudential framework. So we have really set up a program with an ESG community where people from risk are talking to portfolio managers, to financial people, globally all the people who are involved by the different regulations. And certainly some topics have to be handled globally, especially the topic of ESG data. Again, the idea was not to respond to each regulation through buying data by one data provider, but to see what is the overall need of data within the bank, knowing that some data concerns impact disclosures, other data concerns risk measurements. So really have a clear idea of what you need and then have a global view on your data needs. Other aspects that have to be handled in a transversal way is, for instance, training or change management. A lot of topics concern the front people, and again, the idea is not to progressively have trainings every 3 weeks according to the changes in regulation, but really to have a global view on all that. So we started with individual products and finished with a whole program.
Yeah, just maybe moving to you, Francesco, meaning that you are working in kind of silos by regulations, but ESG disclosures would be one of those topics that are really transversal, that is addressed within a dedicated ESG committee that you are leading as sustainability leader. So yeah, kind of new role.
What we did actually now in 2020, because ESG was too much scattered around the bank and the group, we created a sort of, we call it ESG control room, but it means like it's a committee where basically all the areas of the bank are represented by one manager, and at least they all come to discussion about the strategy at least once a month. Usually we meet under like the co-leadership of the head of my department and the CFO. And out of this managerial table, all the major streams of projects are coming out and spelled out as specific projects, and they're addressed with specific intervention. But that doesn't mean, coming back also to your point, that they are not like isolated from each other. There are a lot of synergy, especially you mentioned correctly about data. Data architecture is very important. So you have to think carefully how you want to structure your data architecture about this, about ESG, because a lot of regulation is coming out, and there is a lot of connecting the dots also on this. What I just wanted to stress that is very important, a strong top management approach on this, because if you don't have like an endorsement by the top management, it's going to be very difficult to carry out, execute all these activities, because they're new, because not everyone is familiar, because some people in the bank would not understand the importance of that. So it's very important also when you come up with some KPIs, because of course all the ESG will bring along KPIs, which should be treated as also financial KPIs and communicated as such, with the same importance. You need to have at least you need to have your top management involved that can give like at least a direction, like a ballpark direction. Then of course you can work bottom up again, all these numbers, all these figures, but without like a clear endorsement from above, it's going to be very difficult to achieve all these results.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, because this is also something we see with or we can observe that with smaller actors, it requires so much like new skills, new competencies, that they are working by regulation, and suddenly they are like just acknowledging that the disclosures that is related to products are finally the same or more or less the same, or align with the disclosure that is required at the entity level and the information that you need to collect from your own counterparties. And then finally you have to set up this kind of ESG disclosures kind of task force. This is also something we are working on at the ABBL level, meaning that these disclosure aspects are clearly transversal, and we need to have like various expertise around the table to understand how the same information could be used from a portfolio management perspective, from an entity level disclosures perspective, or from a risk management perspective. This is probably, in my view, the biggest challenge that we are facing. Maybe just one question for you, Mehtap. always online, because your business is like quite specific in Luxembourg, so the depository banking activities. So in a way, you are not like directly impacted by those regulations, but you are probably also dealing with certain indirect ESG related challenges. So I would be interested to hear how these ESG disclosures requirements are either impacting you directly because you have like a certain strategic focus on that, or your own clients, and then you have to also incorporate certain aspects within your own business models.
Sure, thank you, Julien. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Okay, great. And I'm delighted to be in this panel. Thank you so much to ABBL and LuxFlag. Julien, I will, before answering your question about our role, I want also to give some examples from our world, from the governance perspective. We have added the ESG related risks under the oversight of our Risk and Credit Committee that I'm chairing as CRO. And then like this committee has oversight, but for the detailed work and detailed communication, etc., we have established a BBH Luxembourg Sustainability Forum, which is meeting regularly, and it's a multidisciplinary forum. I want to underline the multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary part of it, because there are risk people, there are people from control functions, but you need definitely business people as well. So we are coming together to discuss, to update each other, to look at the impact of the regulations on us, but also on our clients. And our European Regulatory Intelligence team is also closely monitoring the industry developments, getting pulse checks and discussing with us. And also, whenever applicable, we are discussing also the matters with our executive committee. And also vendor management is also an important component, and vendor management is also part of the sustainability initiatives. So this is how we are organized a bit from a governance perspective. Of course, there are regulations that are impacting us, but some of them are impacting mostly our clients. Like we all know about the CSSF circular about climate risk, and also CSSF had done some self-assessment for some LSIs, less significant institutions, and also ECB had done similar self-assessments with significant institutions. But also, for example, I want to give quite a recent example of the regulations or supervisory items impacting us and or our clients. Julien, as you would know, and some others might know, ESMA, European Securities and Markets Authority, had recently published in May 2022 a supervisory briefing. And I thought that this is a very good paper talking about the sustainability risks and disclosures in investment management area. And also the briefing was addressed to EU national competent authorities. In the case of Luxembourg, it is CSSF. So there was lots of guidance in the document, lots of good guidance for the supervision of the fund documentation and marketing material, about the disclosures, about fund documentation and website disclosures and periodic disclosures, etc. There was an item 46 in this briefing, which was also very interesting for some of the market participants in Luxembourg, which are depository banks. And there was very constructive, very good discussions happening recently at ALFI, ABBL, and also at the FMI level, but also with the CSSF. And there was, I think, the very constructive and great communication continues. And of course, the CSSFDR imposed some new depository obligations on our clients. And as a depository bank, our depository function is also looking what would be needed from us. And I think our initial discussions with the regulators show that depositories are expected to do what they would normally be expected to do in terms of investment restriction monitoring. For example, if a fund is classified as Article 9 fund, and this might mean that classification may entail certain specifications in the investment policy of the fund, which in turn would derive the need for ESG specific investment restrictions monitoring. So as we were doing in the past, depository banks will need to take into account the investment restriction monitorings, and also depository banks are currently reviewing and updating where necessary their due diligence questions, especially in relation to ESG investment strategies of the clients. I think one of the key objectives of the ESMA supervisory briefing was to put the responsibility on management companies, on the UCITS and AIFMDs, to provide this kind of information to depositories and also to implement the regulations. And as I say, this is an interesting topic that is being discussed in the industry, including ABBL, IFI, CSSF and others. And I think depository banks will need also to have a fresh look at their things, especially in relation to the due diligence and also the investment restrictions.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting, because in fact, as you mentioned before, and we have a lot of like depository banks in Luxembourg. We had a lot of discussions in the past, meaning that of course those regulations are not impacting Depot Bank directly, and then do we have to do something? And this ESMA supervisory briefing is like bringing some useful guidance here in a world where lacking of guidance, how to implement those sustainable finance action plan, especially for those depot banks that have to perform their own duties. So the ESG disclosures from their own clients will be used for performing those duties. So this is, I guess, a paper that banks, but also asset managers, of course, have to look at, especially from how to disclose information properly, because there will be like a kind of a toolbox for the supervisor, how they will investigate and check whether those disclosures are properly done or not. So probably something also for the audience to check the ESMA supervisory briefing. So thank you a lot, Mehtap. And I would say probably a question for all as well, because those ESG related disclosures requirements, of course, they have at the heart of the obligations, the issue of data. Maybe a practical case or something you could share with us. How do you address this data issue or challenge, I would say more? Do you have like already tried to collaborate with other banks, with data providers, with fintech companies, because we know that we have also fintech companies in the audience? How did you try to find solutions to address this data gap? Also maybe questionnaire or internal in-house work that you have performed?
Yes, we are. There are several data. First of all, we do this data mapping, really trying to understand what the data we need, and we clearly see that there are different sources. So there is data which we can get from data providers. There is data that we need to collect through our clients. So yes, we have currently done a first questionnaire to do an ESG assessment of counterparties when we do loans. We see also in our prudential framework that we need for some types of data to work on proxies. So here, also at the level of the ABBL, the idea is also to see if we can find national proxies, so that not each bank has its own methodology and way of working, so that globally, at least on some type of data, there is a common definition, a common way of calculation, and that it's not becoming subjective. I think the idea of all this regulation is to have transparency and to make things comparable and benchmarking. Perhaps I can quickly share with you what we did by elaborating a green bond framework. This is, for example, that was a challenge for us because, again, we are handling with data that we are not especially used to. So in order to elaborate this green bond framework, we worked first of all, also with a second-party opinion to make sure that this framework globally reflects the best practices. And we emitted a first green bond, which focuses on green buildings. And in order to make sure that we are investing in green buildings and that there's the good use of proceeds, we worked with a real estate consultant in order to have robust eligibility criteria and make sure that as a bank, not being a real estate specialist, we are not greenwashing and really having this external advisor on our side to help us. And it is also with the help of this external consultant that we will publish the impact report of this green bond. So this clearly shows that on some topics, on some type of data, we will rely on external help. And according to the type of green bonds, for example, we will emit in the future, and the diversification of the use of proceeds, it will become more and more challenging, actually.
Thank you, Alessandra. I don't know if you want to add something. Otherwise, yeah, I think we still have like a couple of minutes, but it's always good to give time to the audience for any questions. I don't know if Mehtap or Francesco, you want to add something. Otherwise, I think we could start collecting questions.
Julian, maybe I can add
sure.
a couple of sentences. We said that SFDR doesn't impose new depository obligations to depository banks, but of course the regulators doesn't expect the depository banks to assess the appropriateness of ESG classification as part of investment restriction monitoring, but also depositories are expected to do what they would normally do in terms of investment restriction monitoring. So maybe the challenges that we have are a bit less compared, for example, to some other panelists, like the two other great panelists that they mentioned. But having said this, of course, some of the difficulties, for example, on the data quantification of data, in the stress testing, etc., we have similar things as well. We also started, we don't believe that, like saying that there's no data and let's not do anything is an option. We had looked at the impact of the climate risk on our stress test, for example, from a qualitative perspective. And then, of course, we are working with everyone to see what will happen about the data. Another very important point, in my opinion, concerning the nature of this risk type is the reputational risk, reputational impact, which is always very difficult to quantify, and also the interdependence between physical risks and transaction risks, and interdependence and correlation between climate risk and credit risk, climate risk and market risk. So I think there's a whole series of the things that we could discuss, but I just wanted to mention a couple.
That's a very good point. Quantifying the impacts and then the externalities is very important, of course. But the qualitative nature of the ESG disclosures is also very important. Basically, you have to practice what you preach. So you have to have a clear and consistent narrative behind the information, the quantitative information. So maybe time for the audience to ask questions if you still have time.
Thanks to all of you. Is there any question in the audience?
Thank you very much for the panel. A question to all members of the panel, if possible. And by the way, I'm Alex Tavares from the Intercontinental Exchange. When it comes to data, data is one of the biggest headaches for many. Where do you see the biggest data gaps existing? Is it more risk management? Is it more for regulatory purposes or front office? Where would you like, let's say, the data to be filled?
Maybe I can start. And so I take that risk, and that's a very good question, because this is clearly a question that we have asked to our members, meaning that we cannot just complain about the data issue or the data challenge if you are not like putting practical examples behind. You need to have concrete data issues, and then we need to work on the solutions behind. Otherwise, we are just complaining about something which is like quite gray. So if I can use a practical examples, sometimes you don't have the data because the data is not reported, because you have like as a counterparties, you have an SMEs, you have non-EU companies, and anyway, then you have to find other solutions. You can develop a questionnaire and you have to collect those data. One practical example that I could share is with all the banks that have like an exposures in terms of lending here in Luxembourg. If you are financing green buildings, for instance, or acquisition, renovation of those buildings, you need to collect from a risk management perspective the energy performance related information, energy performance certificates. And this is something you cannot like easily get, either because this EPC has not been issued due to the date of construction of the building, or because the client has not the certificate yet. He cannot like find it anymore because it was not a mandatory expectations at that time. And then you have to engage with a dialogue with your client. And this is just one example from a lending perspective, because then you're going to have more or less the same issue with other type of lending, because new information is now needed. They are not like produced by any service providers. This is an information that's led with your own counterparties. So you have to ask your counterparties to find back those data, or find another stakeholder within the ecosystem to get the data. And then you need to check that the data is like reliable, of quality, still up to date. And this is new processes, new information. And then you have also to train those front end people to get used of those new processes. So it's just an illustrative example, but your question is really relevant. We need to put clear example behind the data issues.
Thank you. Do we just have a last question from the audience?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we have heard about ESG massive regulation and the impact on the bank strategies, business, and also all the department or the banks involved. So what is the perception at the client level? What is the view in terms of cost?
Yeah, I must start on this one. I don't know, it's working?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question, and also related to the previous question. I see the main challenge of getting data, getting information, both in the bank from the front office and the client side. And the perception often you get from clients, especially those who are not like of big dimensions or not used to reporting on this, is that all this regulation is a cost for them and they don't see any benefit. And from the other side, you also might find someone also on the banking side that says all these massive requests of information or new regulation might also damage the relationship that I have with the client. So what I think the key challenge here is to try to educate both the bank, the front office side, and also the client that it's this cost, okay, they are costs, of course, especially they're one-off costs and also recurring costs if you look at also all these new disclosure requirements. But they're also an opportunity, because I think that this trend of sustainability is inevitable and will not be stopped regardless of current situations, continuous situation. Therefore, we should all start to see also this cost as also an investment, and therefore whoever is investing more and is getting more ready now will have the chance to lock in a first mover advantage that other banks and also other clients will not have with regards to finance.
And I also think that in regards to clients, what will be a real challenge, besides collecting the data, is really also making it understandable for clients. So there's a huge amount of information, and I think we arrive at a limit of a capacity, of human capacity to process, and at some point of time I think we banks or asset managers will be able to do so, but the final customer, when you talk about carbon intensity, GHG emissions or carbon footprint, or you have like 4 indicators for globally one concept, and you have to discuss this with your client, this will be, I think, the real challenge at the end.
If I may add to a quick sentence, for me also it is the forward-looking part of the data, because the historical loss data or historical data doesn't necessarily tell about future. So short term maybe it is okay, but medium to long term, it is very difficult to find data in the world, because we don't know what will happen, but definitely all of us will need to try to think, to model and to quantify in the stress tests. But forward-looking part of this risk type is also very important, but also challenging.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to our speakers and ABBL.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to the audience. Thank you. Next session will start at 4 p.m. Thank you.